Welcome to this DDI CADcast. My name is Quentin Rock, and today we'll cover the enhancements to the sheet metal functionality in SOLIDWORKS 2014. Our first new enhancement in sheet metal 2014 to take a look at is the ability to add sheet metal gussets. This has kind of been a long time requested thing for sheet metal parts, so let's take a look at it. Now you've always had, there's always been workarounds to a sheet metal gusset. A long time ago, several versions ago, you could basically model it with extrudes and cuts and fillets, and then you had to just accept that you weren't going to be able to flatten it. In the last version or so, you've been able to exclude faces, so you can do that same modeling, but now you can pick faces that you want to exclude, so it just basically throws those out when it flattens it, so you're able to still flatten the part. But now in 2014, you actually have a new feature called sheet metal gusset. And you'll see it's very simple. It basically just prompts you to pick the two faces where the bends are. And not the bend region themselves, but the actual two faces that are on either side of that bend region. I'll come back to this area, but very briefly, this is where you set what edge it's going to do. And you'll see the software automatically picks an edge between the bend for me, and it also clicks a point. That point is where I'm actually offsetting this from. So if I didn't like that point, it was on the top edge and I want it on the bottom, you can see that's where I'm actually offsetting that gusset. So where it is located along this edge essentially is what I'm picking. And it's color coded with pink and purple, so you can see those out in the graphics area. And again, I can flip the offset to one side or the other. Obviously the other one would be out in space, but I do have those options there. The next section is where you really define the profile. So see, I have if I just want a uniform in both directions, which I mean on both faces, this direction and this direction along the face, I can just do in-depth depth of 10, whatever that is, and I'll just jump it up, and you'll see obviously I got to pick something that fits within the parameters, but you can see that just adjusting it will change that size. This little picture is kind of handy. It shows you where the D1 and D2 is and all the angle and the depth. But if you want to have a little bit more control, or you want one direction to be different than the other direction, you can choose different directions, and you'll see in my preview here as it updates, I can choose different values in there. And I can also choose to one direction and an angle rather than a direction two. If I go back and let's just make it uniform, we'll make it 10 millimeters. Oops, not 100, 10 millimeters. And then there's one last option here in this section, is whether we want a rounded gusset or a flat gusset. And you'll see by the preview, the flat gusset might be an interesting one to actually make, or the rounded gusset. If I choose that flat gusset, you'll see I also get the option here to have edge fillets on or off. And it's preview is kind of hard to see there, but if I actually want to have a little bit of fillet, even though it's not rounded. So if I want those edges to be filleted, not completely a full round. Next section down is just dimensions on the depth itself. So for example, you'll see as I change some of these, how wide it is. And again, anytime you're not sure, if the picture doesn't help, you can still just get the tooltip if you hover over these. So if I wanted this is kind of interesting. If I push this in, it looks grayed out, but if I push it in, it does light up like it's a button, and I'm able to add some draft. What I really like about this, and just the command in general, is I no longer have to figure out, if I do extrudes and cuts and fillets, I no longer have to figure out the inner and the outer corner fillets, or the offset minus the thickness that the interfaces are going to be when I model this thing in just 3D modeling. So it's a huge time saver to actually be able to put a gusset in. We'll go ahead and accept it. I'll just turn off draft and make it a very simple one, and just take a look at kind of how this works now. You'll see that it's actually modeled both the interior and exterior of it. It's also just put that sheet metal gusset in the faces to extrude. So if I was to actually flatten this part, you'll see that it does in fact flatten. One last thing I want to touch on in the gusset is just these areas here. So you'll see that I am able to pick different edges. So for example, if for some reason I've got a sketch here, I want to come in here and say, you know what, I want this gusset to be at some type of angle or I want the vertex to be on a sketch point I put in there, and that's where I'm going to offset it from. If I don't offset it, it's centered around that, by the way, if I choose to not offset. So I can actually go in and have gussets be at different angles and different parameters as well. It doesn't have to be straight 90 degrees. If this edge flange was at 75 degrees instead of 90, it would still work as well. So it's pretty versatile little command there. Also saves a lot of time on the modeling end of having to actually model this geometry and then pick every face to exclude just to put a gusset in a sheet metal part. The next enhancement to Sheet Metal 2014 is in the area of lofted beds. Let's jump into SOLIDWORKS and take a look at this. So the lofted bed command obviously is not new, but what is new is the new option in here to choose whether it's a formed or bent manufacturing method. So in prior versions I can click the two profiles and it would create a lofted bend. But if I wanted sort of a bent instead of a formed shape here, I actually had to go into this profile, split it into multiple profiles so that I had actual edges and everything in there. And it was pretty tedious. It wasn't really easy to do. You almost had to draw the exact shapes and everything to do it. So again, there were some workarounds, but they weren't ever perfect and they weren't ever great. If I go now and I choose the bent, you'll see a number of options open up. Now obviously at the bottom here, just to review, we have our default sheet metal parameters. This is the first time I'm adding this, so it has all those sheet metal parameters we might need. But what you'll see next is the faceting options. And you'll see I have a whole bunch of different choices here. I have it by chord tolerance, number of bends, segment length, segment angle. And basically if I click any one of these, you'll see that it now changes what this facet value is. So that's what I'm adjusting in the facet value section. So if I wanted, say, 10 bends in there, I'm adjusting it there. And you can see already by the preview exactly what it's doing. Again, the other ones, segment length, how long I want each one of those, segment angle. If I want a specific angle, I can specify that as well. So you'll see pretty much you have just about any options you want. I'll just choose number of bends for ours as well. The other thing I want to mention is you'll notice that I have those little pink dots on the bend region here. And what happens is if I go ahead and click one of these, I can actually adjust individually the bends. So in this case I only have 2 bends, but let's say it was a full rectangle to a circle, it might be more bend regions in there. So if I want this one to be, yeah, I still want number of bends, but I only want 7 bends for this one, I can adjust that differently than the other side. And I'll go ahead and accept that, and you can see it works. And of course the ultimate test is always, does it flatten? And it does. So that's the new options. I want to point out one little gotcha here. If I go back into this command, you'll notice I cannot switch it back to formed. I actually have to delete the feature. So just keep that in mind, that the first time you insert the lofted bends, it does give you the option for bent or formed. If you go back and edit them, you can't switch a bent back over to a formed. So it's a small little gotcha there, but just something to keep in mind. Our next enhancement is corner reliefs and bend transitions. And as you can see by the slide here, basically it's the ability to add a true corner relief feature. And what I mean by that, and what's different about prior versions, is it's actually in the folded state when you get to see what it's going to look like. Whereas in prior versions you can add it only in the flat patterns and you wouldn't really see it when it was folded up. So let's take a look at this feature in SOLIDWORKS. It's underneath the corners menu called corner relief. And the easiest way to use this tool is just to hit the collect all corners. It's going to find all the corners available for it in this part based on how you modeled it. And you'll notice that I have corner 1, 2, 3, 4. Then down at the bottom here, it actually shows the different type of relief options, and each one of these is going to have its own set of options. So also pay attention that I actually have these highlighted. So 1, 2, 3, 4 is highlighted and type is not set. So as I scroll through them, I can see which corner is actually doing it, and you'll notice the define corner section here tells me which faces are actually going. This is a small part, so it's pretty easy to find them. You'll also notice that the little ball turns orange when you have the one selected, and as you can guess, if I click on it with the cursor, I can actually select the corners out in the graphics area too of which ones I want. And I can control select and grab multiple ones. Let's say just take corner 2 for example, and say I want to make it, we'll start out with the rectangular. Now you always have to put in parameters that are going to work, and if we zoom in, there is a little bit of a preview in there that you can see. But you'll see I get different options here, how long I want that saw length, ratio to thickness, tangent to bend, add some fillets, what those values are. So a lot of different options available in there. I'll click another edge, and it's basically just a list. You'll notice now it says rectangular on the list. So now I can go to corner relief 3 and pick circular instead, and then it's asking me for a slot width. Again, it has some options for ratio to thickness and tangent to bend that I can adjust as well. And by the way, let me zoom out. That's down here. You can see it's highlighted. I can also do things like control select a couple of them and say, okay, I want tear for both of these. You'll notice tear doesn't really have any options. It's just a straight tear. If I go just to one of these, I can choose the all brown relief type, and again, that has some different options for it. So it's very flexible on how you want to do it and how you put in values. Last but not least, we have a constant width option here, and I'll go ahead and choose that as well. But keep in mind, again, you can control select, you can go back to these. If I go back to rectangular and I want to remove it from the list, I can delete it, so that one's not being done. But you have a lot of different options. Let's go ahead and click OK, and then just kind of zoom in here on some of these different corners. So there's my rectangular relief. So I'm actually seeing this relief now in the folded state. There's my constant width and my all-brown or circular, and then I believe I did, actually that's constant width. I believe the other one was tear. But so you can see that there's a lot of different options. You get to see them both in the folded state and the flattened state as well. So a very helpful tool. Just to look at a different sheet metal part here, if I want to go ahead and add that corner relief again, I can do that. Collect all bends, and SOLIDWORKS again is really good about finding all those bends. If I don't want a particular bend, or I only want to do it on one of the bends, I can. If I just leave it to type not set, or I remove it from the list, then it won't put anything in there. So I can just put circular on one of these bends. Or let's say this is a very complex part. It has 50 bends or something like that. Rather than collect all bends and then have to cycle through each one to find it, or I haven't been able to find a real good scenario for this yet, but in cases where it just doesn't for some reason recognize the bend, it doesn't see it as a bend when you do collect all corners, you can actually still define it by picking two bend faces. So again, I've been using this mainly, and it's kind of hard to see because it also highlights in blue here, but I hit new corner and you'll see now I've defined a corner by just picking the two bend regions that are going to meet at a corner. So I have that same flexibility. Most times collect all bends does it, but like I said, if you have 50 or 100 bends in there or something, it's a little tedious to go through the list and find the bend you want. Although you can come out and click on the dots in there to find it too. So if you're looking for corners, you can easily get it, and you have a lot of flexibility on how you want to do corner relief in 2014. And of course, you have that ability to do this inside or in the folded state in 2014. Our last sheet metal enhancement to take a look at is in the area of swept flanges, and it's just some improvements for conical and cylindrical bodies created by the swept flange and how it flattens. So if we jump into SOLIDWORKS and take a look at our part we've been working on here, if I just flatten this part, you'll see it kind of gives me a shape. It tries to make a rectangular shape out of it, or close to a rectangular bounding box for it. If I go back to that swept flange command, you'll see there's a new option for cylindrical and conical bodies where I can actually select an edge on how I want this to unfold. So if I choose that, and then go to flatten, you'll see I get a much different pattern. So I have choices now on how I want the flat pattern or how I want this to unfold and flatten for whatever manufacturing purpose I might use. Again, in an example of a conical shape like this, the flat pattern typically was just a rectangle in prior versions. Now, if I go in there and I edit it and I choose the same option, and if I pick the edge here, you'll see when I flatten it, I get a little bit different shape. So you just have choices now on how this thing flattens and how it looks in the flat pattern, so that it's a little more accurate for your blanks on depending on how you manufacture these parts and how you actually form these parts. One last thing to mention is both those two examples actually were swept flanges, but the profile for that swept flange was a sketch. It only works, or this command only works or gives you the option when it is a sketch. So for example, on this part, the swept flange here, I just selected the edges of this base flange that was already in there. So when I go edit that, you'll see I don't get the options for it. So it only works again if it's not selected edges but sketches for a swept flange. And that's the enhancements to swept flanges in 2014.
Well, that wraps up this CADcast. For more CADcast topics, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ddicad or our tech blog at ddicad.com/techcenter. Thanks for watching.